Hello, welcome. My name's Anthony Wilson. I'm an astrologer, teacher, and DJ living in Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal. And I haven't done one of these before, but I really wanted to speak to another astrologer about American politics, seeing as Kamala Harris has decided to run as president for the 2024 election in December. And Janelle will help us today look at the astrological chances of Kamala being elected, um, and all the other things surrounding the election. So first of all, um, welcome, Janelle. Tell us about yourself. I'm sure people know you already, but tell us something about yourself.
Hi, I'm Janelle Belgrave. I am an astrologer, an acupuncturist, and a clairvoyant here in New York City. Please disregard the lightning and thunder that's about to start outside my window. So if you hear it, that's what it is. And I'm very thankful for the rain because it's been very hot in New York City. Yeah, we have an election coming up in about 3 months, give or take. And as seems to be the new norm for us in the US, is that our elections seem crazy all the time. Like there's no, like we have an election, it's going to be, easy peasy. We're just going to go to the polls. No, it's like crisis mode for us. And yeah, the Democrats have recently asked Kamala to step up and let Joe Biden take a back seat, I guess, which makes sense. I think his health is probably being taxed by all the stress. And I think he has just been diagnosed with COVID for the third time, I think, So, it's a difficult job. It's a difficult time. And he's an older gentleman. And to also have had COVID 2 or 3 times now in the past 4 years, I think is weighing pretty heavily on him. So, I'm thankful that they are mobilizing around her, and I think she can win it. I think the bigger issues for us right now is the fact that with Donald Trump's last election, his administration did a very good job of dismantling a lot of the institutions that we have to kind of keep the country running. Um, and the most, I guess, glaring one would be the Supreme Court, right? It's a pretty conservative court. They're not necessarily ruling in ways which would make sense because it seems as though quite a few of them are interested in whatever the Republicans have cooked up next in terms of fascism, authoritarianism, not having a democracy anymore. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, I was very worried. Um, I'm sure many people were about Biden's chances of defeating Trump. And I was hoping, sad to say, I was hoping he would withdraw and allow Harris to step forward. And I must say, since that happened, I've found this whole thing extremely entertaining, in terms of the media coverage and the social media side of it. I mean, if you look at some channels like MSNBC, she's president already. Obviously, Fox News would have it the other way around. I mean, the American news media is quite strange at the moment in that respect. I mean, it's very much, if you think of like 20 years ago, the most of the main news channels wouldn't have been taking sides in effect, but it seems to be what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
his JD Vance and him have been saying some very I would say helpful things towards Kamala Harris here because she's actually been branded a childless cat lady. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
how many votes is that going to get from people that are not already supporting Trump? You know?
I mean, yeah, sure. I don't know. I think we spoke about this before, but I'm not sure how many new people are going to come in to vote for her. Not because she's not great, but at this point in the game, I think people who are going to vote for her, for the Democrats already have, made their minds up versus, and the Republicans as well, So all the insults, maybe it will irritate people into voting, but I don't know. I don't think there's much to really compel people at this point. I think there's a lot of fear about going back to what we experienced with him 4 years ago. Like it was difficult. His term was really difficult for the country. It was extremely stressful. Every single day was a new crisis. Every day was something ridiculous happening, something dangerous happening. And, so I feel like a lot of people just don't want to go back to that. Like that's like the line
Yeah,
in the sand.
I mean, it seemed at the last election that Trump himself influenced so many people to vote either
Hmm.
for or against him. It didn't so much seem that people were voting for Biden as much as against Trump. And the numbers were incredible. If you look at the numbers of people who voted in that election as a percentage of voters, it's way over anything in the previous 2, 3 decades.
Yeah. And it'll
I mean,
probably,
it has to
yeah,
be the same again, I think, for Kamala Harris to win, right?
I think it probably will be, especially with Roe versus Wade being repealed. That is a big, big game changer. I think today it came out that the state of Iowa has now put in place a law basically saying that after 6 weeks you can't seek an abortion. And most women do not know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. That's a month and 2 weeks. You've probably missed one menstrual cycle and that's it. So it's just like that's dangerous, right? We've already seen a lot of death happening, a lot of tragedy happening, near death experiences happening because women cannot control their reproductive health. And I think that's going to be a major trigger for this election. We're probably going to see a big turnout amongst women, um, old and young, because I think there are women who are past reproductive age who are furious. That I think the law came down in like 1970 or 1971. That's 50 years of having that freedom, and to see it repealed in a lifetime I think is infuriating to a lot of women across the country.
The other thing about Harris compared to Biden is that she's being projected as a young people's candidate. Beyonce's allowed her to use a song. Charlie
Mm-hmm.
XCX, who's kind of the it girl of the you probably can't say it girl anymore. That shows my age, but like she's like the cool pop star of the moment has
Mm-hmm.
endorsed uh Kamala Harris. So it does seem that she's got a lot of people that could influence that vote on her side.
I mean, that's interesting because in October she's turning 60, but I guess that goes to show you when you have two men who are in their late 70s or early
I was
80s
actually
running.
surprised
I
to
was
see
just
her
like,
age. Yeah, I
60.
was actually surprised to see her age. I didn't think she was that old.
Mhm. I mean, black don't crack, sure, fine. But I think also a little bit of joy too. Like she's that nice Gemini rising, so there is a lightness to her character. And I think also probably going forward, Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, there is an emphasis on youthfulness, not so much about physicality, but just expression of who we are. Like getting older doesn't have to mean that we have to be boring or dull or, behind the times. So I think maybe she's pulling that forward, hopefully. Like she's relatable, right?
Right. Okay. Which brings us, let's first of all, for people wanting some astrology on this on this video,
Astrology show.
let's have a look first of all at her natal chart, um, which I'm gonna share now. Um, if I can, hang on just a second. Yeah. So her chart, once while I'm sharing it, her chart is Sun in Libra with Gemini rising.
Mhm.
Um, let's have a look at this. Can you see that one?
Yes.
So Sun in Libra, Gemini rising, the Moon in Aries. Now, this is something that is also in Donald Trump's chart,
Mm-hmm.
is that she was born on a full moon with the sun almost exactly opposite the moon. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can't get much closer than that, can you? It's what?
Couple minutes away from exact.
It's 9 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, tell us about this chart.
I mean, first of all, we're in Placidus, which is different.
Oh no, I haven't changed it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. But yeah,
Uh,
I feel like full moon people are here to make an impact in terms of, this is a lifetime of culmination. So getting things done. Also a life of relationships and relating well to others. I think you are a full moon baby yourself too.
I am, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I only discovered, I should have realized this ages ago as an astrologer,
Mm,
but the sun's opposite the moon. And it's all about me now, all of a sudden, this. But anyway, the sun's in Capricorn opposite the moon in Cancer in my natal chart. But I only realized a few years ago that the full moon was actually in Gemini
mm.
before, on the same day as I was born. Yeah, no, on the previous day, about 8 hours earlier. No, 16 hours earlier. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough about me.
Yeah, but this is interesting because I think a lot of times there's a misconception about Libras being, conciliatory or peacekeeping. Yes, to an extent, but they're like being the opposite of Aries. There's this thing around coming into contact with other people to learn where your limits are,
Right.
you know? So knowing when to compromise and knowing when to fight. And I like that she has this moon in Aries in this chart. And it's pretty well placed. It gets a sextile from Saturn, it gets a trine from Mars. So this moon is
Yeah.
empowered
Yeah.
to emotionally take action on things. So I like that for her. And she has Mercury right next to the sun. It's a Mercury in Scorpio. Um, so there's a directness to her. And I think that's going to be really good going forward, that she has a very thorough mind, if anything. I think that's probably worked to her advantage in the work that she's done as a lawyer. I think she's been a prosecutor for a number of years before she went into Congress.
Yep.
And so she's not a mental slouch, you know.
Sure.
Um, she has a mind that's gifted enough to research, to examine, to make sense of things, and to like, all right, now this is what we're gonna do. And I
Hmm.
think also with the fixed Mercury, it's like there's a doggedness, a stubbornness, a fixity, a focus that's probably going to help her, you know.
It's
Um,
interesting for me that the only aspects, major aspects that Mercury is making, um, are not in the same. They're by dissociation. They're not in. The Mercury's conjunct the Sun, but in a different sign.
mhm,
It's trying Saturn, but not to a water sign. That
mhm.
gives that. I think that gives that Mercury in Scorpio quite a lot of strength, doesn't it?
Possibly. I mean, I feel like it's almost like a lone wolf in a way.
Mm,
Like
mm,
it gets support, but no one's interfering directly.
mm,
So Saturn probably gives it that additional focus, additional structure. It's also a well-placed Saturn. It's an Aquarius. It's a little bit, the sun is burning it up a little bit, but maybe that helps. I don't think all negative, quote unquote, negative aspects need to be
right,
bad. It's something to overcome, you
right.
know? So maybe there was a point in her life where she didn't have a lot of faith in her mental abilities. Maybe it was something that she really had to push and strive at to prove to herself. Because I always think about Scorpio in terms of that theme of rejection,
Hmm.
and through that not wanting to be rejected, trying to position yourself in such a way in which you are always of value. You're always like, having something to give, basically.
Yeah. So
And then what
the
else?
Mercury ruling the ascendant, um, reading the chart in Scorpio, but with Gemini rising, the moon in Aries and Libra sun, she's anything but fixed in her general makeup.
Mhm.
Whereas this Mercury is very determined and tenacious, kind of, well, direct, cutting in a sense with the in Scorpio.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and I think we've seen that from her in the past. I think during the was it last time there was the nominations for the Dems? Like I think during the debates, if she was, I can't remember exactly, but or when she's doing any kind of when they're in Congress and interviewing people, basically, they'll give her a whole bunch of fluff, and she is just so she's stone cold, and you
right.
can see her mind working to like eviscerate somebody, you know, and like she kind of leads them into like a trap, and then pounces, and they're just like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm excited to see that if Trump decides to debate her, which I really don't think he will, because I think he knows that he can't come up against her and possibly win. He can't shout and bluster and try to intimidate her. Like it's just not going to work.
Okay, so anything else to say about this chart in terms? I mean, I found that full moon quite interesting. I noticed that reading up on her, I noticed that her parents separated when she was 7 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is quite common in full moon charts, where
Hmm.
the father and the mother are not necessarily working on the same page.
Yeah.
Um, happened also with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I've noticed it in other full moon charts more often than you'd think. And I was interested in what you were saying about the way that she relates to the public or to people in general. Because if you look at her life history, she lived in a lot of places growing up, different places. Compared to your average American politician, she seems to be much more worldly than many of them have been in terms of their life experience. I mean, probably similar to Obama in that respect, I suppose. Um, but I do see her completely equipped to cope with the needs of running for president and being able to survive, as you said, debates or challenges that she might come across. I'm just putting up the transits for today. I didn't realize I didn't have them already. Uh, yeah, there's the eclipse. Let's talk about the eclipses while I'm doing that because she's had well we've had the eclipses in Aries and Libra this year and last year.
Mm-hmm.
What effect would you think that had on this so far regarding her chart?
Well, I like that so then right now the North Node is in Aries and the South Node is in Libra. The South Node tends to be a little bit more of a draining aspect or clearing things out of a chart,
Hmm.
taking things away, versus the North Node tends to be an amplifier, pulling things towards the chart. And in her case, with the Moon in Aries, and her Aries house is the 11th house, there's this pulling towards her, people, groups, um, support, friends, alliances, people who have a similar hope and dream for the future as her. And also the moon theirs is like success with the moon, which is usually women, and also success with the public life, because the moon can definitely represent the public. So I like that the nodes have been kind of amplifying that for her. Luckily, right now the North Node it's wrapping up its journey through Aries. We're going to have the nodes move into Pisces and Virgo, I believe, at the end of January, I believe, January 25th or 26th, if
Yeah.
I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken.
Yeah.
And that's going to be moving into her 10th house. So that will mean that there is an amplification of her career, right? Which would make a lot of sense for her assuming the role of the presidency. This would be a big, big push in terms of her leadership, in terms of her power, in terms of her authority, in terms of how she's seen in the world. And there's nothing bigger than, being president of the United States of America, basically,
Yeah,
versus.
I mean, to me that looks like a reflection of a possible progression to that position.
Mhm.
Um, so I'll just mute my. There's a police siren going by in Lisbon. Not often in Lisbon, but right now.
So yeah, I like that a lot of this change happened when Uranus came to her Jupiter, and Jupiter is the ruler of her 10th house, her MC. So this
Right,
is like surprise, a shock, a big change, unexpected,
right.
kind of lightning bolts being thrown down at her life. And it's, Jupiter in the 12th house, it's kind of behind the scenes. So we
Yeah,
may not have known it, but behind the scenes things were happening for this to happen for her.
yeah,
Um,
and she's had this her midheaven in Pisces. Um, Saturn transited that midheaven, and it's continuing in the 10th house. I mean that it is opposite her Venus right now. Um, but it is a far less problematic Saturn transit in Pisces than it is for Trump, which we'll look at in a moment.
mhm.
And Saturn in the 10th house is reflective of this, reckoning time in Korea where you the hard work pays off
Mhm.
that you've put in the past.
Yeah, the hard work pays off with more hard work. So it's just
But
like,
yeah,
so you want to be a president, huh? Great, here you go. But The work doesn't decrease, it increases, and now everyone's looking at you as the authority figure. The buck
Right.
stops with you. So you are Saturn now. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, she's some people like her, this she seems like she's having fun sometimes as a politician.
Hmm.
And she's been criticized for that, of course. I mean, how dare you? But the moon in Aries and Mars in Leo, that seems quite genuine from this. This sort of love of enthusiastic approach and putting yourself completely into something. But
Mhm.
being a president, that's hard to maintain, isn't it? That energy.
Well, I think it depends. I feel like President Obama had a good time when he was in office. I mean, despite all of the, really difficult times he had with his administration and Congress and, the Tea Party and all that, even Donald Trump at the time, he made it seem enjoyable. They brought a certain charisma back into the White House. Same thing, I think, with Bill Clinton back in the day, like playing the saxophone on late night
True.
TV, so I think maybe for the Democrats, there is this idea of we can still present with some measure of joyousness. And that doesn't have to mean that we're not serious, but I don't think life in this country has to be doom and gloom all the time. We do need joy and pleasure and fun in order to mitigate some of the struggles that we're going through, you know. And we need that desperately because I think there are several generations now who are tired of everything being so difficult.
Okay. Her ascendant at 24 Gemini is very close to Trump's sun, which I believe is 27 or 28 Gemini, something like that.
22. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
22.
Now uh, Jupiter is approaching that ascendant,
Mm-hmm.
um, and will be in Cancer from, well, it would be May
Next
next
May,
year, May.
yeah,
Yeah.
May 2025.
Um, I mean, that could be beneficial to either candidate, presumably.
Mm-hmm. Possibly. I mean, in this chart, in this house system, Jupiter is still behind the ascendant. So I think this is a lot of protection behind the scenes, a
Hmm.
lot of support, that's working on her behalf.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
not sure.
sorry, I haven't um, put the whole
Mm-hmm.
sign house system in because in there we would see that in this month she's actually received a boost from the moon, sorry, from Mars and Jupiter in this month,
Mm-hmm.
which would reflect, actually, that's reflective of what's happened, isn't it? I mean, Mars and Jupiter coming into her first house effectively. So
Mm-hmm.
that's an endorsement for the whole sign house system.
Yes,
Uh,
but even still, I think there's a lot of, like we said earlier, a lot of behind the scenes action happening on her behalf. Um, yeah, and then when it crosses into the first house officially with this house system,
hmm.
I'm not sure if it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be exact by the time the election rolls or inauguration day comes around. But even still, I think just having Jupiter on her side will give her a boost because I don't think this is going to be an easy transition um, for a number of different reasons. Like I think there's a lot of good elements in her chart pointing toward victory, but victory may not be a smooth transition because we're dealing with a party opposition that isn't interested
Well,
in
no,
not.
I mean, that's guaranteed. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
So last time it was a really violent coup attempt
Hmm.
on January 6th. This time I was listening to another astrologer on YouTube by the name of Denise Siegel, and she was mentioning the fact that, we still have to contend with a Supreme Court that if the Republicans challenge it, the Supreme Court might go for them saying, like, no, we don't legitimize this win, right? And then what will we be, right? We have this election, we might have a winner, but if we have a court system that does not pass the next step for this person, where would that leave us?
Hmm.
And those
Hmm.
are real potentials here. We have a court that is known at this point in time for doing the exact opposite of what the will of the people wants.
Yeah, I mean, politics is a very strange affair sometimes when people talk about democracy, both in the UK and in the US, it's quite possible for the leader of the country not to receive most of the votes in the election system. And Democrats seem guaranteed to get more votes now than Republicans across the USA. But these fights of these local fights in places like Georgia and uh, Michigan and Arizona. I find all this fascinating. I have to say, like the. I mean, I remember when Biden won Georgia. You know,
Mm,
when Trump looked at one point looked nailed on. And it was a magnificent moment. I have to say at this point as well that I mean I'm very excited about the idea of Kamala Harris being president, but my primary, you know, my primary concern with American presidents is foreign policy because I don't live in the USA.
mhm,
And right now, the foreign policy of the United States, as it nearly always is horrendous. And I mean, Kamala Harris has made no indication that she would be any different in policy on Palestine, for example.
mhm. Yeah,
So I think I just need to throw that in there. I'm sure you feel the same way, but just so anybody watching doesn't feel that we're endorsing the Democrat
right.
Party wholesale here, because
Yeah,
I think Trump is so scary that the idea of him losing excites me much more than it sounds very
yeah,
negative and Capricorn and nasty, but the idea of him losing excites me far more than the idea of the Democrats winning. But
yeah. I mean, no, I do not endorse the Democrats' position on Palestine for a number of different issues. It's just, the US still functions as an imperial power. It's still a colonial power. That is still its bread and butter. Our export seems to be a lot of war and, land grabbing and resource grabbing. And who can stop us? We have one of the, if not the largest military power in the world. Even if everybody rallied together to take on the US military, I still don't think that would be a match.
hmm.
It would still be, an unfair fight. So when you're coming onto the world stage like that, it's very difficult for there to be any compromise in a way that doesn't serve the US in their eyes. So, but that's still, like you said, Trump is still the scarier option because who knows what he would do. We saw what he did the first 4 years.
Okay, let's now look at the chart of Donald Trump. Um, I don't know about you, but I always think when I look at this chart that it's a real argument for astrology works. Like
Mm,
he's got all the traits. I mean, basically all the negative traits. This chart, I think, could be a great fun person. Make no mistake. It's Sun Gemini, Moon in Sagittarius, outgoing. Sense of humor should be a Leo rising, enthusiastic, lots of fun to be with. Um, what we see in the public eye is this Leo ascendant that, Leo ascendant can have a terrible reputation for being self-important, putting your ego out there above drawing attention to yourself as special. And of course, Sun in Gemini, nothing sticks to Sun in Gemini.
mhm.
They get away with it, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so I always think that uh, he embodies the worst traits of a Gemini, at least in his activities in the public eye, uh, while having this confidence of a unswerving confidence of a Leo rising. I mean, nothing seems to make him ever doubt anything he says or himself. Um,
I mean, I think in his younger years, so let's think of Trump in the 80s and 90s, I think probably had a more positive expression outwardly of this chart in terms of showmanship and, charisma and, being well received on TV, his TV career, the persona that he had developed for himself in those younger years for himself, I think does match up with the more positive expression of this chart. But I was just looking at his second house, ruled by, let's see, it's Virgo, ruled by Mercury, and then his 11th house, also ruled by Mercury. So, second house in terms of his income, and then also the 11th house talking about income made from his personal businesses. They're both ruled by this Mercury and Cancer in the 12th house, right? So, a
Right.
lot of things we can't see, we don't know what's going on. But I think the tightest aspect that Mercury makes is to Neptune in the third house. And I think that describes a
Mm.
lot of his financial dealings over the years, is
Right.
that a lot of it has been underhanded. He has
Mm.
been
That's interesting.
embroiled in so many legal cases. He's defrauded people. He's had so many business failings. I think it was like a Trump stake and casinos and schools, and it's just on and on and on and on.
Right.
And it's just, that slippery Gemini ability to kind of get out of things or talk his way out of things or to charm his way out of things has been the kind of saving grace. And I think also probably the family money, the family legacy that he had, it was enough to kind of buffer him, and probably also having friends in high places that were probably involved with this stuff, right? If
Hmm.
we consider the ruler of the 11th house is still that Mercury, his friends probably got a cut and were also, probably involved in protecting him, because anybody else would have failed a long time ago or have been imprisoned a long time ago for half of the stuff that he did, you know. But here he is. How old is he? He's almost 80. He'll be
Hmm.
80 in 2 years, is it? Where is he now in terms of his perfection year? One second, guys. So right now, I think he's in a seventh house perfection year if he's 78
Okay.
now, correct? So a lot of those legal things, a lot of his enemies, a lot of, the people that he's probably screwed over the years, it's all kind of coming out now, especially with Pluto entering into that house briefly. We've seen a lot of the pressure building and building. That seventh house is ruled by a Saturn that's not in a great position. It's a Saturn in Cancer in the 12th house. So I think a lot of his secrets are coming out the woodworks,
Right.
you know? So I don't know. I think in some ways Trump is, especially as a Sun Uranus person with the North Node, I think he's a lightning rod for the country to get a grip or a clear vision of who we've become in a lot of ways.
Okay.
I don't think he's a mistake. I think he came in at the exact moment to show to us that we are not who we say we are. You know,
Right.
the image that we project to ourselves and the world doesn't match up, because this is the person that was allowed to get into power. And I think he is the expression of the garbage that we have to clean up before we can be a better match for the image that we think that we are.
That's really interesting. Um, the Mercury Neptune square that you mentioned, and with to do with his financial dealings, that's interesting. And also, I was thinking about these recent. I mean, it's not a recent development with him, but the way he will, when speaking, will kind of go off into, he hates using the auto cue, but at the
Teleprompter.
same,
Mhm.
yeah, but at the same times he'll go off on these weird references, which obviously his fans love him so much you can see them looking a bit confused behind him as he does it, but they
Yeah.
put up with it. But it's completely bizarre. But it's very much in line with this Mercury Neptune idea of fantasy speech, if you like.
And
Um,
probably to an extent some erosion of his faculties
yeah, oh,
too,
yeah, sure.
and I think that's also backed up by the fact that the South Node is going through that third house for him too right now. So I think the dexterity of his speech and communication skills are taking a hit at the moment, and probably worsening that Neptune Mercury square. The lies, yes, the freewheeling, off the cuff, but he's not as sharp as he used to be, right? He is declining. He's 78 years old, and he probably has not been doing the things necessary to keep himself sharp, right? Whether it's diet and exercise or
Right.
reading or any kind of things that you would use to keep your mind sharp and your communication sharp. I don't think this man has been taken care of. So now it's become worse. It's been declining and it's more visible now, for sure.
Okay.
If anything, I think that Mercury is also going to be getting eclipsed this October. I think that's the in the bends. So when a planet is in the bends, so we have the eclipses happening, I think at 10 degrees Libra Aries in
Mm-hmm.
October.
Mm-hmm.
So that Mercury at 8 Cancer is in between those eclipses by
Right.
square. So that
Right.
Mercury is going to get a lot of emphasis come this fall. And I'm wondering if that's going to have a lot to do with, again, the financial dealings and things like that coming back up. What a
Okay.
mess.
Well.
What a mess.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I suggested that we did this chat, and I mean, I know it's not the easiest thing for you to talk about because you're right in the thick of it there, and this is must be genuine horrible frustration for a lot of people seeing a person like this being praised and l held in such high esteem by so many people from America. It seems like his popularity doesn't die, and some from some strange areas as well. I mean, areas you wouldn't expect always.
I mean, I think that's a conversation for another day.
Hmm.
Again, probably looking at the United States's charts, the Constitution, and the Independence Day charts for this country. There's a lot of Neptune involved, unfortunately.
Right.
There is a lot of self-deception. I think aside from war, one of our biggest exports is Hollywood, where we sell dreams, we sell movies, we sell art to an
Yeah.
extent.
Yeah.
And a lot of us believe the hype about ourselves. And it's
Yeah.
just like, but on paper, on the ground, that's not what's reality. And that's really hard, I think, for people to grasp
Yeah,
and
and I mean,
consider.
from the outside, a lot of us, it's not so much that America believes the hype about itself that's the problem. It's how little it knows about the rest of the world in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how much people are educated about other countries, even countries that it borders. That is a bit of a frustration for, especially, I suppose, especially Europeans, because Europeans come from countries where we think we have a very proud history as well.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you know that? Why are you saying Holland's the capital of Sweden? Or, and I mean, I do sometimes say to Europeans, well, how much do you know about Africa?
Mm-hmm.
How many capital cities can you tell me? It's
Yeah.
not the knowledge of geography is influenced by politics and the media. It's not just it's not it is dependent on that. Anyway, I'm going off the subject as I'm wont to do. So
No,
I'm
but it's important. Like I can tell you for a fact, there was no geography class when I was in school. It was pushed into history and it was very brief,
seriously.
and I think, yeah, yeah. Geography, at least not in New York City when I was in school. So the 90s and early 2000s, there was no like separate geography class. It was a part of social studies and it was like the basics. And we weren't learning about specific countries. It was mostly European history and American history, and everything else was kind of washed over. So, yeah, there's a concerted effort to keep Americans isolated. There are lots of Americans who would never leave the country, never leave their hometown, never leave their state. So there's definitely a controlling factor around keeping people ignorant of the rest of the world because then you never want anything better. You don't know any better.
Right.
And everything else is socialism or communism. So,
Yeah.
you know, so
O-
yeah, I think that is a concerted effort for sure.
Okay. I'm gonna put up a bi wheel now so we can see the transits to Donald Trump's chart at the moment. Um, I'm going to stick my neck out on this and say that the biggest reason why I don't think Trump's going to be elected
Mm-hmm.
is that Saturn transit.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does Saturn ask you to do? Yeah, it asks you to tighten up areas where you haven't been tight in the past. It asks you to face up to things you've done wrong. It asks you to make sure you're not just getting away with it all the time, you know. And Saturn squares, oppositions, and conjunctions, they're all about that.
Hmm.
And this, he's so resistant to changing anything. I mean, he's just hired a a vice president candidate that is basically doing what he does. That doesn't make a lot of sense. You're just repeating this approach of like I mean, it's name calling and stuff like this, and not dealing with any policy matters. You can't go on like that forever and win over people that you've lost already. So I think this Saturn transit is the biggest argument for him having a very difficult year this year and next. What other
Hmm.
transits do you think are worth looking at here?
Mm, I mean that Uranus to his midheaven as well. Um, it's unexpected. The changes. I don't think he's not as in control of his public image the way that he was before, I think. So I think that puts him into like a reactionary state where things just keep coming at him. And it's also square to his Mars, so that can be reactionary as well. Um, but yeah, Pluto in opposition in his seventh house. I mean, it's very early, but I still think we're just getting the beginnings of what that Pluto might bring
Pluto opposite the
around from.
sun.
Um, is that his progress chart? No, that's the
No,
transits,
these are the
right?
transits. So
Okay.
Pluto's now in Aquarius. It's going back into Capricorn. But for the next, I don't know, 10 years, it will oppose his sun. Um,
His son? His progress son?
Wait, what am I doing here?
You're looking at the
No, sorry.
transits, right?
No, no, excuse me.
It's okay. But yeah.
I'm looking at the transit chart, thinking that his natal sun. Yeah. Uh,
Hmm.
so Pluto's moving into the seventh house.
I think it's
Excuse
also
me, I
going to start
interrupted
to,
you. No, I completely.
it's fine. It's going to in conjunct that Mercury eventually, So we spoke about that Mercury Neptune square. Pluto's going to get in there and at least disrupt Mercury a bit.
Yeah.
So maybe that can be like, looking at his assets. These things are already starting to happen. It's just the beginning phase. And I think that's very frustrating for people who are just like, when is justice finally just going to get this guy out of here? He has a lot of protection. You had mentioned earlier that Jupiter being in Gemini is helping him to an
Mm,
extent, I think.
right.
But I always tell my clients, like, listen, Jupiter is nice, but he just expands upon whatever is already there,
Yeah.
and this is someone who hasn't been up to positive things throughout his life. So Jupiter only has the opportunity to expand upon what is currently around, which is a lot of negative stuff. So I wonder if we're going to see him become more erratic, um, and just flustered possibly. Because I think when Jupiter comes to the North Node, it's like an opportunity to like receive positive things, but I'm not sure what that would look like for this chart right now.
Hmm.
From who? From the like who are his friends? A lot of his friends, a lot of his dastardly Gemini friends, like Giuliani, for example, they're not in positions to help anymore,
Yeah.
you know. But that's not to say that there aren't people who want to, whether it's the Supreme Court or, other people in positions of power who might attempt. But also Jupiter in Gemini is not necessarily the strongest Jupiter either. So I don't know.
Right. Okay. I mean, the eclipses are moving from Aries Libra to Pisces Virgo.
Hmm.
The first eclipse in Virgo is in September, I think.
Yes.
Um,
September 17th at 25 degrees of Pisces. So it will kind of hit his sun by about 3 degrees
okay.
by square. So,
I
and that
mean,
is the ruler of his first house for sure.
well, with Saturn and Neptune transiting late Pisces or mid Pisces in the case of Saturn,
Hmm.
you would imagine that those eclipses would I mean, what I always think with eclipses is that they trigger ongoing transits.
Hmm.
This is something I'm looking at more and more actually. Is that when you get an eclipse and you have a planet, like I noticed it with Uranus and Taurus all the time. Whenever the eclipses, when they were in Scorpio and Taurus, that Uranus transit really started to be graphically shown every time the eclipses happen. I especially noticed it with the price of Bitcoin,
Hmm.
which I was following, and every time the eclipses went on, because Uranus in Taurus is to do with swings of money, one way or another, and every time the eclipses hit Taurus and Scorpio, it was going one way or the other, and finally, the final eclipse, I think it was a full moon, I think it was a lunar eclipse in Scorpio or in Taurus in November, 2023, 2022. Yeah, 2022. Um, that's when Bitcoin started to rise again. It was actually on that week. It dipped hugely on that week and then started to rise. Ever since then, I've been looking at eclipses as triggers of ongoing transits. Um, Now, again, I'm talking about that Saturn in Pisces. That eclipse, I mean, he may well have lost the election before it even starts, before even the
Hmm.
voting, before the voting actually happens. I think that eclipse may well in September may well have some bearing on what happens in November. Um, okay, let's. The other thing I noticed looking at is progressions.
Hmm.
Um, Let me just put that up as well. Um, is that his his progressed midheaven, it conjuncts his natal Pluto. Let's just have a look at that in the next year or so. Um, so share that. Can you see that?
Yes.
So if you look at the um, progressed midheaven here at 9 degrees Leo, his natal Pluto is at 10 degrees Leo.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not surprising he's talking about people never voting again, right?
Yeah. He wants
It's
to
not
have
surprising.
all power.
Yeah,
Ultimate power.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um that's definitely not a joke.
No, it's not.
Um
The good
but
news is that the ruler of all these Leo planets is now the sun in Virgo. So the sun is not nearly as powerful as it once was in
right,
his progressions, which is the
right.
saving grace. Because if it was in Leo, I'd be like, oh, I don't know, he might pull it off. But in Virgo, I think that sun has kind of taken a step down in
Oh,
terms of
right.
the
So you were
ability.
saying that when he was elected in 2016, it was the sun was progressing in through Leo still.
Yeah, it was an actually, I think the sun was at
Ah, that's interesting.
the sun was at like 29 Leo. So that's like the regular
On
star.
his
I mean, it's
ascendant,
progress. Hmm.
on his natal ascendant when he got
Yeah,
elected.
yeah. So it
Ooh,
was like this big, shiny Regulus star crowning moment. Regulus being like, this the point of royalty to an extent.
okay.
So but now, the sun has, stepped down from power and, it may not have the ability to make that happen this time around.
Right. That's encouraging. Anybody looking at this video hoping for a balanced debate on Trump and
No.
Harris, they would have already tuned out, I think, but I'm
Yeah,
making no
no.
apologies for that. Um, geez, okay. Is there anything else you'd like to look at in terms of the astrology of this? I've got the chart for the election day. Are you interested in that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So this is the chart for It says December the 5th. That's not correct, is it?
No,
No.
it's
Okay, let me change that.
just push it back
Right.
1 month.
By November the 5th. Did you know that November the 5th in Britain is a very
By
strange.
Fox.
So, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
That is the basis of what was it? Oh gosh, that movie that I love.
Oh,
V for Vendetta.
I haven't seen it.
Oh yes, that is a popular one.
It's set on 5th of November.
Well, it starts off on the 5th of November as like basically the premise is that the UK had fallen into a dictatorship in that reality. And on November 5th, there was a figure that came forth to kind of disrupt it.
Okay.
And he wore a Guy Fawkes mask.
All
But
right.
you might like that movie. Tell me if you watch it. It's
Yeah,
really good.
maybe. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I know how you are when you like something and somebody doesn't, so I'll lie anyway if I don't like it.
Mhm.
Uh,
Don't listen to him, people. Anyway,
All
I
right.
mean,
Um, Here we are, election day. I've got this for midday because I don't know what time the polls open. Um,
polls open,
so
I
we
think
can
around
disregard the
6
ascendant on
a.m.
this chart, I think. But apart from that, yeah.
Um, I mean, Mercury is in Sag.
Hmm.
I think Mercury's going to be retrograding around that time, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. It's not retrograde at that moment, but it might.
Um, so Mercury will be retrograde November 25th. So
Okay.
I'm assuming that Mercury's going to be in his shadow at this time. So, unfortunately for us, this has been a theme lately where Mercury is often either not well placed or he's retrograde or stationing. So this might be a situation where, although it might take some time for the results to be finalized,
Okay. There's a
honestly.
T square from
Yeah.
Venus opposite Jupiter to Neptune.
Okay. Yeah. So, we're probably going to see some deceptive stuff. Is to be expected.
Uh-huh.
We know who we're up against. We know that they're not interested in playing fair. Um, and the fact that Mercury is ruled by that Jupiter involved in that T square is a pretty big deal. Um, but I'm very curious. I'm wondering if you were to roll the chart back to 6 a.m., so I think that's when the polls open typically.
Oh yeah,
I
6
think it's
a.m.
either 5 or 6 a.m. It's pretty early.
Yeah, well, I imagine it is, yeah.
People, because we don't have the day off to vote. So people have to try to vote either before work or after work. Polls open. So, yeah, at least here in New York City, polls open at 6 a.m.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
That's a good time to choose then.
So if it's a 6 a.m. chart, at least the moon will be in Sag, which
Right.
I think is kind of positive. And I think that really points out that I do think
It
that
is
women are
by
going
some
to be,
people's
mhm,
definition void of course.
yes, because what the last aspect would have been to Jupiter.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
if
say, but it seems people have different definitions of what a void of course moon is, but as I first learnt it, that would be a void moon
so for those of you listening, a void of course moon is talking about the moon is not making any direct aspects, major aspects, I should say. So
before it changes
conjunctions,
into the next sign.
square, opposition, sextile, or trine. If you go by traditional standards, so only using the first 7 planets of the zodiac, so the sun through Saturn, then this moon would be void. If we go by, the modern rulers, it would still kind of be void,
No,
but it
it's
would
still
be,
void. It's past Neptune as a
it's
square
past
at
Neptune
6
by
a.m.
square.
anyway.
Yeah. So, if the last aspect is square to Neptune, we can definitely
Yeah.
be pretty sure that there's going to be some hijinks and some deception and, confusion and things going missing and, all the typical stuff that we're used to at this
Hmm.
point when it comes to our elections. But I am kind of encouraged by the fact that it's a moon Venus conjunction um in Sag. It kind of makes me feel like women will be definitely playing a big part in this election for sure.
Okay.
Um, in opposite Jupiter, yeah. So we'll see. It moves into Capricorn, so it's not exactly, I don't think it will be as a joyous election per se.
Well, by the end of the day, um,
We might be feeling a little bit, frightened, Saturnian, is this going to work? But I do think overall the results are not going to come in right away. I don't think so. I think there's probably going to be a delay
okay.
and some like people, claiming this is, the typical election fraud and that kind of stuff. Maybe even some voter intimidation, possibly. Mars is going to be in Leo. I think he's going to be in his shadow at that point, and he's opposite to Saturn. I mean, Pluto, I should say. So it's a lot going on. It's a lot.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. All right, we'll leave it there for the election. Tell me what's going on with yourself at the moment. Have you got anything happening? I know you spoke at, was it Norwalk recently?
I spoke at NORWAC at the end of May, and I did the astrology of psychic phenomenon. The video for that is on the NORWAC website, I think for a small fee if you want to view it. But just talking about, the traits we see in people who are psychic or clairvoyant or have some ability to connect with, the world that is unseen.
I've seen people giving you good feedback on that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Okay, that must have been interesting as well. I've never been that far west in America. I'm sure it's very different.
Yes, it was rainy and cold the entire time. It's very Pacific Northwest weather, gray and drizzly. But I did see a rainbow, which was nice.
That's nice.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, Janelle, for giving us the rundown on that. I found that very interesting, a lot of your points there. And maybe we'll do one of these again soon on some another subject a bit less, well, a bit less serious or a bit less um possibly tragic as well in
Oh
the case.
gosh. Well,
Uh
we love music, so
yeah, true. So we'll do something on I'm getting into a lot of new stuff at the minute, which I didn't expect this year. But
hmm.
yeah. Uh so take care of yourself. Thank you so much and goodbye.
Bye.